Welcome to Think Outside the Box, a deep dive. And remember, this episode is a part of Teacher Victoria's ESL class. Don't forget to drop her a message about it. Today, we're going to tackle something I'm sure a lot of you have thought about before. To really speak a language well, do you absolutely have to learn grammar?
Oh, it's a great question, and one that researchers have been kind of going back and forth on for decades now, really. Strong arguments on both sides, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got some research here about how kids learn language, also like the pluses and minuses of just immersing yourself in a language, and even some real-life examples of how, little grammar mistakes can actually cause big misunderstandings. So where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, one of the best arguments against, putting grammar first comes from looking at how little kids learn language. They don't start with textbooks and grammar rules, do they?
Right. No.
They learn by being surrounded by the language, by listening and interacting with everyone around them.
It's so true. It's almost like they just kind of soak it up, They pick up on the patterns and the rules without anyone sitting them down and explaining it all.
Exactly. And there's more and more research now that suggests that adults can actually use this natural ability too. Studies have shown that people who focus on just becoming fluent, even if their grammar isn't perfect at first, they often end up being able to use the language better in the long run.
So are we saying ditch the grammar books, buy a plane ticket, and just move to another country?
Well, not so fast. While immersing yourself can be super effective, there are definitely some things to think about. For adults, time is precious. Kids have years and years of constant exposure to develop their language skills, whereas grown-ups, we might need to speed things up a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And let's be real, messing up your grammar a little bit when you're chatting with friends, that's one thing. But what about in more, serious situations?
Exactly. That's where the whole grammar matters argument starts to hold more weight. Think about things like writing a professional email, going on a job interview, or writing something for school or work. In those situations, being clear and accurate is really, really important.
So even though we might be able to get our point across with a little less than perfect grammar in casual conversation, there are definitely times when you've got to be precise. Actually, our research had a really interesting example of this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was this study that looked at how even tiny grammar errors in work emails could make people think you're not as competent or trustworthy.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as messing up a verb tense, saying, I go to the store yesterday, could confuse people or even make them think less of you professionally.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it like that. It's almost like grammar becomes a way to build trust and show that you're professional.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding, making a bad impression. It's also about using grammar to really express yourself more clearly and with more, style. As you get better at grammar, you're basically unlocking more tools to communicate your ideas better and be more persuasive. This reminds me of something we often discuss in Teacher Victoria's ESL class. Don't forget to shoot her a message about what you think about this deep dive. It's all about finding that balance, right, between fluency and accuracy.
You got it. And that balance, it's going to be different for everyone, depending on their goals and what they need to use the language for.
Okay, so how do we find that balance? If we want to be fluent, but also know grammar is important, where do we even start?
That's the big question, isn't it? And like a lot of things in language learning, the answer is, well, it depends.
Oh, come on. You can't just say, it depends. Give us some details. What are some things we should be thinking about?
Sure. So think about your goals. Why are you learning this language? Is it for travel? For work? Maybe for studying? Each of those is going to require you to focus on grammar a little differently.
Okay, yeah, so if I just want to be able to, order a coffee and chat with people while I'm traveling, I probably don't need to worry too much about, the subjunctive mood or whatever.
Exactly. But if you're trying to, let's say, publish research papers in another language, you'll need to really understand there's more complex grammar structures.
Makes sense. It's like there's this whole range of grammar knowledge out there, and we need to figure out where we fit on that scale based on what we want to do with the language.
Exactly. And it's not like you're stuck in one place on that scale either. As your goals change, the amount of grammar you need will change too.
So, practically speaking, how do we hit that sweet spot between just diving into conversations and, hitting the grammar books hard? What are some steps people can take?
One way I like to think about it is this. Language learning is like a dance between two partners, fluency and accuracy. You need both of them to really move well on the dance floor.
I love that analogy. It really captures how those two things work together.
Right, so let's say fluency is leading the dance. It sets the direction and the rhythm. It's about expressing yourself without overthinking every single word.
And then accuracy would be like the follow partner, making sure the steps are done right and giving support.
You got it. Accuracy is what refines your movements, makes them look polished, and helps you avoid those missteps.
But if you only focus on being accurate, the dance can feel stiff and robotic. Gotta have that flow.
Absolutely. So how do we get that flow? Well, first, you got to be okay with those first few clumsy steps. Don't be scared to speak, even if you make mistakes. Every time you mess up, it's a chance to learn.
That's so important, and it's something we talk about a lot in Teacher Victoria's ESL class. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Actually, it's super important for learning. Be sure to send her a message and tell her what you're getting out of this deep dive.
Couldn't agree more. Now, as you start feeling more comfortable with those basic steps, you can start adding in some more complex moves. That's where grammar comes in. Think of it as the technique that lets you express yourself with more precision and, well, artistry.
So it's not about picking one over the other. It's about figuring out how to blend fluency and accuracy together so they work together.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, as you get more fluent, you'll naturally start to see patterns in the language. You'll start to understand grammar rules without even realizing it.
It's kind of like that learning a song by ear thing we were talking about before. The more you listen and sing along, the more you just absorb the melody and the structure of the music without even trying.
Exactly. Same with language. The more you surround yourself with real conversations and communication, the more your brain starts picking up on those underlying grammar rules.
This makes me think about all the different ways we can immerse ourselves in language. Living abroad is awesome, but obviously not everyone can do that.
For sure. But there are so many other ways to create that immersive environment. Watch movies and TV shows, listen to podcasts and music, read books and articles, even just chat with native speakers online. There's tons of options.
So even if we can't be in a country where the language is spoken, we can still surround ourselves with it in other ways.
You got it. And the key is to make it fun. Find things you actually enjoy doing, and the learning will happen naturally.
Love that. It's about making language learning something fun and interesting instead of a chore. Find the joy in it.
Speaking of joy, let's take a second to just acknowledge how awesome it is that you're all learning a new language. It's not always easy, but it's definitely rewarding.
It totally is. It's so important to celebrate all those little wins along the way.
For sure. So next time you trip up on a grammar rule or feel stuck, remember to be patient with yourself. You're doing something really cool.
That's such a good point, and it's something we try to encourage in Teacher Victoria's ESL class too. Learning a language takes time, and it's okay to make mistakes. The important thing is to keep going.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Ooh, I like a challenge. What is it?
Think about all the different ways you can make your own life more immersive in terms of the language you're learning. What are some small changes you can make today to surround yourself with that language more?
I love that. It could be something as simple as changing the language settings on your phone or watching a short video in your target language.
Exactly. Every little bit counts.
And remember, this deep dive is part of Teacher Victoria's ESL class, so be sure to message her and let her know what you think. Now let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion of fluency and grammar and language learning. And we're back to Think Outside the Box, a deep dive. We're wrapping up our conversation about grammar and fluency in language learning, and don't forget, this deep dive is part of Teacher Victoria's ESL class, so be sure to send her a message afterwards and share your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've talked about finding that balance between fluency and accuracy, being okay with making mistakes, and creating those immersive environments for yourself.
Right. And just before the break, you challenged our listeners to come up with small changes they could make to bring more of their target language into their everyday lives.
Exactly. Because consistency, that's really the key here. Even small things, if you do them regularly, they can lead to big progress over time.
Like they say, little by little, a little becomes a lot.
That's it. And one of the best ways to stay consistent is to, find those activities that you actually like doing. If you love watching movies, find movies in the language you're learning. If you're into music, listen to artists who sing in that language.
It's all about making language learning a part of your life instead of just another thing you have to do.
Exactly. And, as you immerse yourself in those things you enjoy, you'll start to notice something really interesting. You'll actually develop this kind of intuition about the language.
What do you mean by intuition?
It's that feeling where you just kind of understand how the language works, even if you can't explain all the grammar rules perfectly. It's like you know when a sentence sounds right or wrong, even if you can't say exactly why.
Oh, I get it. It's like when you've heard a song so many times that you just know what the next chord or the next word is going to be.
Exactly. You develop an ear for it, a sense of how it flows.
So how do we cultivate that intuition? Does it just happen naturally? Or are there things we can do to, speed up the process?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. It definitely comes with more exposure and practice, but there are ways to make that process more efficient. One technique I really like is called shadowing.
Shadowing, what's that?
Basically, you listen to a native speaker talking and you try to repeat what they're saying, like at the same time almost, as if you're their shadow. This helps you really internalize the sounds, the intonation, the rhythm of the language.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Any other techniques that can help us build that intuition?
Oh, for sure. Another really good one is to focus on input more than just output.
Hold on, what's the difference between input and output?
Okay, so input is all the language you take in through listening and reading. Output is what you produce through speaking and writing.
So are you saying we should spend more time listening and reading?
Not necessarily spend more time, but definitely make sure you're getting enough of both. The more input you expose yourself to, the more your brain starts to recognize those patterns and little nuances in the language.
Like feeding your brain a healthy language meal.
You got it.
Huh.
Just like good food fuels your body, a steady stream of input helps your language grow.
This has been such an interesting deep dive. I feel like we've learned so much about how grammar, fluency, and that intuitive sense of language all work together.
Me too, and I hope everyone listening is feeling inspired and ready to keep going on their language learning journey.
Yes. And before we go, just another reminder that this was part of Teacher Victoria's ESL class. So make sure you send her a message and let her know what you thought about today's episode and what you learned.
Absolutely, a great reminder. We're so thankful to Teacher Victoria for putting together this awesome learning community.
And to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of discovery.
Sure.
We've talked about the power of immersion, the importance of not being afraid to make mistakes, and how amazing it is to develop that intuitive feeling for a language.
Remember, learning a language is a journey, not a race. Enjoy the process, be proud of your progress, and never stop exploring the incredible world of languages.
Happy language learning, everyone. We'll see you next time.